Welcome back to the Tommy Brideson Show. Now today we're going to talk about bench press. In particular, how you can get the most out of your bench press, whether you're training for strength training, building muscle mass, or dialing into powerlifting. There's some real common points that's going to link it all together for you. Now, when you have a look at bench press itself, there's really three big components and three big linchpins that you need to optimize in order to get the most out of it. Now, the first one is your shoulder position, your rib position, and how you create height through your rib cage. That's a really important point. Now, that in particular will then lock in your shoulder blades. So we're going to spend a bit of time talking about that in a minute. The second one is how you create leg drive. And the leg drive in particular really links your whole system together. The leg drive pushes all this tension into your shoulders. And then what it does, it creates a stable base for you to then just do your bench press on. And then the third component of it is how you hold the bar, where you touch on your chest, and the bar path itself. So when you get these three big components, these three big linchpins dialed in, whatever you're training for, you're going to get the most out of your bench press. Now, the bench itself is, we're kind of forcing a slightly unnatural position at the shoulder. We're locking our shoulders down, but the reason we're doing that is because when we're benching, it actually makes it a lot safer and a lot more effective on the shoulders and the press itself. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit, but there's a reason why we really dial in on shoulder position, get a little bit of arch, and then link the legs into it. It's not just to remove or reduce range of movement. It's actually about putting yourself in a position that's going to allow you to continue to progress it because you are in a position that's not hurting you. It's going to allow you to move more reps and it's going to do it in an effective way. So I think let's dive into the linchpins now. And then I want to come back and give a few different, case studies around it and sort of just things to think about. Now, if we have a look at the first foundation and, the linchpin itself is the shoulder position, the rib position, and your scapulars. You often hear people talking about squeezing your shoulders and squeezing them down and pushing your chest up towards the bar. Now, the way I like to think about it and describe it is the higher you can get your chest position, what that does with your shoulder blades, it puts them in a position where they want to lock down and they are glued to your rib cage. When you extend through your ribs, your shoulder blades are going to pop down into a really, really nice position that's going to create that stable base. And during the actual bench press itself, they're just fixed. Now, that actually starts with your rib cage and the height that you create at the ribs. Now, what a common cue is that you're thinking about whilst you're doing the bench press is pushing your chest or your sternum towards the bar. Now, in your actual setup itself, how I like to sort of coach it and think about it is it's the first point in the bench press. It's the first point that gets set. So you essentially have a fixed point on the bench press where your shoulders are locked in. You push your chest as high as you possibly can. And then by default, your shoulder blades come down. In that position, you lock it and you hold it. Then we link the legs in. Now, something to think about with your actual chest position itself is I wouldn't say it's not a natural position, but it's a position that we don't often get into. So we kind of need to train for it. So part of your warm-up program or part of like a prehab strategy is actually working on thoracic rotation, thoracic extension. And that literally can be as simple as laying on your side and doing some rotations or laying over the top of the roller to force some extension. Now, once your extension starts to come to the party, that is when you're going to really start to get an optimized bench press position because it is the first and I would arguably say the most important part of your actual bench press itself. So often when people come into the gym and they come into Strength Tribe here and they're training, it's something that I don't think I'm ever going to be able to arch. But the reality is it just takes a bit of time to do it. And it's something that you never stop thinking about. You're always trying to push your chest up. You're always trying to get height with it. So it's one of those components that even when you're doing it really well, you can't get complacent with it because it really does pull everything together. All right. So that's linchpin one. Now, The second linchpin is your leg position and how you create tension back towards your shoulders. Now, think about this. So say we've got a bench and you've got your shoulders fixed. What we're trying to do is compress everything back to that fixed point on the bench. Because what that does by default, if you compress a space that's 10 centimeters into 8 centimeters, naturally your body has to get higher. So that's going to help with your actual chest position and linchpin 1. So what we do with the leg position is essentially whether your heel's up or flat foot, it doesn't really matter. What we're trying to do is create tension into it where we're pushing back to the point of your shoulder. Now, when we do that, what that does, it creates this stable base. So when you're thinking about it, what you're actually kind of thinking about doing is putting your foot on the ground and you're almost thinking about doing a leg extension. So you're squeezing, you're getting that activation through your quad, you're getting the tension through the hip and then back towards the shoulders. And when that's happening, we know that we've created this really nice stable base for you to actually do your bench press. Now, if you have a look at these first 2 linchpins, all it's really doing is creating compression and creating a stable base for you to do your bench press. So when you're thinking of linchpin 1 and you're thinking of linchpins 2, you're really just creating a stable base for you to bench on. Now, a couple of things with leg drive. Now, there are 2 key components. There is flat foot and there is heels up. Now, it doesn't matter which, different federations have different ways of actual bench pressing when you're in powerlifting. But if you're just training in the gym, it doesn't really matter that much. There are nuances around the length of your leg and stuff like that, which we can dive into in another episode. But today, basically what I want to talk about more so is how it's really just the movement itself that we're trying to focus on. And what we're trying to do is almost push your toes into the front of the shoe, squeeze the quad and create compression back towards your shoulders. So we've created this stable base. So that's linchpin number 2. Now, linchpin number 3. This is there's a lot of nuances around this one, but this is bar path, the grip that you hold on the particular bar itself, and then, the amount of elbow flare or the amount of tuck that you have within the bench press itself. Now, in an ideal world, bench pressing, you would literally bench with a vertical bar path, straight up and straight down, directly over the top of the shoulder. The reality is the shoulder joint isn't designed in a way that allows you to do that. So what we're trying to do when we touch the bar on the chest is touch as high as you possibly can without aggravating your shoulders. So the higher you get your chest and the wider you go with your grip means you can bring the bar and the touch point higher. But that doesn't suit everyone. So some people are going to have to bring their grip in a little bit as well, and they're going to by default have to touch a little bit lower on their chest. So how I would probably start out with your actual bench press itself and figuring out this linchpin, don't think about being too close or too wide. Just find a happy medium point on the bar itself and focus on getting linchpin 1 and 2 sorted and set where you've created that compression and stable base. Then just get into the actual bench press itself. You'll naturally gravitate and feel where it feels best for you. And then over time, you can make changes and go, okay, well, what I'm actually looking at doing with my bench for the next 2 or 3 blocks is I want to work on muscle mass and building some reps and some volume into my training. So you might go, well, I'm actually not going to do that in a super wide leverage position. I want to take my bench through a longer range of movement. So you'd sort of bring your hands into a mid grip. But then at a later point, when you're looking at potentially jumping into a powerlifting comp or something like that, you might go, well, I really want to sort of reduce range of movement and maximize the leverage that I have when I actual bench press itself. So that's when you would start to look at going wider. Now, what I would say to build a bit of a framework around linchpin number 3 for you is when you're actually bringing the bar down towards your chest, the focal point for you has to be where you're touching on your chest and having a repeatable touch point on your chest every single time you bench press. So when you've got the bar set on your hands and you're pulling it down towards your chest, you have to actively push your chest up towards the bar at the same time. Now, what that does is it reinforces the back position and it creates that stability at the back, but it creates a predictable and consistent touch point on your chest every single time. Now, once you have that touch point solidified and your technique is, really dialed in, that's when you really start to make the changes of go wider and bring it in narrower. Now, the other side of this is not everyone's shoulders can tolerate a wider grip bench press. And some people, say for instance, might be really dominant through their chest. So for them, a wider grip bench press might be a good option. But someone actually might be more dominant through their triceps. So having a wide grip actually sort of doesn't lean into their strengths at all. So there isn't a magic rule with bench press. Wide is not better, narrow is not better. You really need to sort of, feel what you'll naturally gravitate towards what feels good. So that is the main thing that we're sort of looking at to start off with, and then you play around with the nuances around it. Now, when we're having a look at bench press in itself, the thing is, muscle mass is so necessary. The more muscle mass you can grow in your upper body, the better your bench press is going to be. The thing with bench press is you are so locked into these linchpins, and everything has to be so dialed in order for you to get that perfect press. Now, having a lot of muscle mass allows you to have a little bit of a backup system and a little bit of a buffer when you're bench pressing. So if you do fall slightly out of position, you can squeeze through those heavy reps or through the last reps of a set because you have like an inbuilt buffer. So when you're thinking about bench press, it's not just about maximizing your actual position itself. It's about building muscle mass as well. So, your accessory work is really important to then help bring up any potential strength or strong areas or any potential weak areas. And that's going to allow you to continue to progress. So you've got one side of the equation where we're really looking at trying to, in an essence, optimize technique, but then we also don't want to forget about the building muscle mass and building some slabs of meat that's literally going to allow you to move some weight. Now, let's go back to a couple of different common sort of points when it looks at the actual bench press itself, so variation. So when you're looking at people, everyone has different size arms, torso lengths, and leg lengths. Now, if someone has really, really, really short arms and they go super wide on a bench press, their range of movement's going to be really, really short. So their bench press is going to look different to someone's bench press that has, say, really long arms. Someone that has really long arms, they're naturally going to touch lower on their chest, and the range of movement's going to be a lot more. So that's something to take into consideration when you're looking at bench press, is that they're not all built evenly. Now, even if you have a look at the leg drive and the leg tension that someone can create, someone that has a really long lower portion of the leg, they quite often can't tuck their legs back underneath them as far as someone that's short leg would. So someone with a longer lower leg generally has a wider foot stance that allows them to push back to their shoulders, but they don't really suit tucking their legs in underneath them because it kind of looks a bit awkward. And if they do, quite often, it doesn't really create tension back to the shoulders. It kind of just hurts. So anyway, now having a move on from that, having a look at the actual bench press itself and having a look at areas that you need to work on. We've spoken about thoracic movement and how to sort of, optimize that, getting more extension, getting more rotation, because it's going to help you get a higher chest and it's going to help you get your shoulder blades into a better position. Something that's often overlooked is the actual front of your hips. The ability to create hip extension. When you're looking at your bench press side on, you really want to have your knee below the height of your hip. So you need a lot of hip extension, or you need at least say 10 to 20 degrees of hip extension to be able to create that tension back. Now, in saying that, when we're training, what we're actually trying to do is build up tension in the quads. We're really trying to build some muscle mass. So part of your warm-up program or your prehab program for bench press itself should actually be getting a lot of hip extension. So there can be simple exercises, just as a couch stretch, where you just literally stretching out the front of the quad so that it allows you to drag your leg underneath the bench a little bit further. And then there is more sort of active movements like a reverse Nordic where you're leaning back. You can use a band as assisted to sort of lean back to open up the front of the hips in more of an active manner. They're two really good drills that are going to help you get some hip extension. And it is often quite overlooked, but if you lock into your hip extension and you get that active movement, it then allows you to create more tension back to your shoulders. So I think it's an area that really needs a bit of focus with bench press, because we often think about the shoulders, we often think about the ribs in itself, but the leg is actually a really big component and it really pushes you back towards your shoulders. So when you are designing a warm-up program for bench press, you're actually warming up through your upper body and your lower body at the same time, even though we're doing technically an upper body movement, but you can see how you really need all the linchpins working together to create a really stable foundation for your bench press. Now, when we're moving into programming for bench press, I often find that people underpress. So bench press is one of those things that, especially if you don't have a particularly strong bench press, the amount of fatigue that you create each session isn't that big. So what you can do is increase the overall volume in a week, or you spread it out across a week. And when you spread it out, you get multiple opportunities across a week to do it. So you increase on the skill component, but then you also, if you're adding volume into it as well, you're increasing on your ability to build muscle mass and also your ability then to express strength. So when you're having a look at the programming side of it, it is just as important as the actual setup that you do for your bench press. So the bench press itself, if you bench press once a week, you're probably going to be able to make some progress, but it's going to be quite slow. I would suggest increasing the frequency that you're doing your bench press to 2, actually 3 times a week to maximize it. The bench press is one of those movements as well where if you're squatting and deadlifting and bench pressing, say for powerlifting, and you have a very specific strength training program, you think about it. The squat is a lower body, the deadlift is a lower body, but the bench press is just a single unit. So you should really be doing essentially 2 times the amount of bench pressing that you are to every one of the squat or the deadlift. So if I'm doing 10 sets of squats and deadlift combined during a week, I should probably be doing 10 or more sets of bench press, because the actual movement itself doesn't create as much residual fatigue that the other 2 movements do. So when you're looking at planning out your training week as well, you should be doing quite a lot of volume. And it is one of those actual exercises where it can tolerate low reps and high reps within one program. Where if you're doing heavy squats and heavy deadlifts, you could taper those right down to low reps to push out the strength output, but you'd probably still want to keep some volume in bench press. So when you're looking at actual bench press itself, really try and pair up a good base of foundation of technique, really focusing on linchpin 1, 2, and 3, which is the shoulders, the leg drive, and then the actual bar path and how you hold the bar itself. And then trying to get some frequency in your training program that's going to allow you to build skill but muscle mass at the same time. So when you're looking at anything around bench press and technique, it loves frequency and it loves volume, but it still doesn't discount the fact that you need to push it from time to time. But the more your technique's dialed in, the better your bench press is going to perform in training. And that's it for the Tommy Brideson Show today. If you want to follow along and see what I'm up to, find me on all platforms at Tommy Brideson. See you at the next one.